keeping with our practice of starting on time, we're going to get started because we have a quorum. And I have just finished a wonderful meal, which some of you are continuing to enjoy. I think that it's appropriate because we live in Buncombe County. We're sitting in a warm room, and we had just had a wonderful meal to pause for a moment and express our own individual thanks in a moment of silence. Thank you. In accordance with State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid both conflicts of interest and appearance of conflicts. Are there any conflicts? Hearing none. You received the October 2015 board minutes in the mail. They're nice and short. Really, I enjoyed them. I could read them in a nice fashion. I'm grateful to some people who record these for us. I'll entertain a motion for their approval.
So moved. Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the October 2015 board meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. We have a number of guests today who are with us, and I want to welcome Donna Cottrell from Buncombe County Planning, Cynthia, whose name I can't read, last name I can't read, but from Buncombe County Planning.
Markland.
That's what that is?
Yes, sir.
I can't forge your check for sure.
How many contracts she signed?
Debbie
From Trumpy.
Trumpy. I can read John Creighton's quite well. I've seen your signature before, John. And Bob Taylor, all from the Buncombe County Planning Board, along with Nancy Waldrop. We also have Stephanie has brought a student along several times, Caitlin Huff. We welcome her. She's a pharmacy student at the UNC Asheville Pharmacy Program. We have with us today a number of guests who are on the panel, and I'm going to ask Mandy Stone to introduce the panel and the procedures for their presentation.
Linda, you gonna do video first?
Yeah.
We're gonna start, as always, with the five voices, the five individuals whose life story we followed as they move from unstable to more permanent housing options. We're gonna start there, and then after that, I had asked, and he agreed, Jeff Stavanger to join us, who's the Assistant Director of Community and Economic Development for the city, to share their strategic goals related to some of the strategies they've developed around affordable housing. And then we're going to give you the opportunity to hear updates and ask questions from the panel before we break out and do some goal setting work. So that's our agenda.
Knowing that there are other people who know you, who can help you out if you need it, and you can help them out, it's balance. I've helped the person across the street go to the airport, and people have helped me when I had a doctor's appointment and really couldn't drive. They've helped me. So that's one thing. But just sharing, spending the time of the day, hey, it's a beautiful day. Just having people to share with, it's extremely helpful, and that's not something I had in my little Craigslist share.
people working together, people who do activities together, look out for each other, and Asheville's a really good community, I believe. There's so many programs and the people are really nice.
But it's the people that really make the community such a great place, and to see the children grow to become something, or to dream to become something and achieve that.
The people surrounding you are happy and helpful and friendly.
Most of the time, the people that live in your community are pretty much going through this kind of the same things that you're going through, so it's kind of easier to ask for help.
They definitely need to come up with some type of budget to create more housing. There is more housing needed.
There's so many abandoned properties around Asheville. Somebody just needs to buy a huge property and turn it into maybe some cheap studio apartments or something. I think that'd be a really good idea. I mean, if I was a millionaire, I would do it, just to try to help,
We need more affordable housing here. It definitely is, we need to stress that because with the demand rising so much every day, where are people gonna go? We're just gonna find more people stranded on the streets. I don't think that's what the leaders in Asheville or any part of the community in Asheville wants.
I don't know. Because like the purpose of the housing authority is meant for you to move in, move up, move out. And it's hard for you to do that if you still cannot afford to move out. So people are moving into housing and basically having to spend the rest of their lives there because one, either they don't have good credit, and 9 times out of 10, if you're poor, you're not gonna have any kind of credit because you don't have anything to back it up. And 2, it's like, can we freeze for a second? Sure. I don't know. Because it's just, I can't really explain it. It's like, where do you go? Like, where do you move out to if you have nowhere to go?
If you can sit or stand or whatever you're more comfortable with. You can sit, stand, whatever you're ready. And John and I can attest to this from Commissioner's meeting and Commissioner DeGraw. Sure. Your green light's on, everybody can hear you.
So leave it off.
So get ready to talk. Remember that.
All right, thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation. What I'll be doing here, my name is Jeff Staudinger. I'm the Assistant Director for Community and Economic Development for the City of Asheville, and I was the city's Community Development Director for 5 years before taking this position. What I'm going to do is provide for you the overview of the city's comprehensive affordable housing strategy. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to review the statistics and the nature of the need. I think you've all been well prepped in that. My understanding is you have a good understanding of that now. I'm not going to talk about current rent structures in the community. I think you've all been prepped out on that. I'm sure Eddie, myself, or any of the panelists would be glad to talk to you about that. But really what I'm going to be talking about is where the city of Asheville is going relative to its strategies to try to address the need in our community. First of all, just to briefly review with you the why we're doing this. We are looking to make sure that the city is contributing in a tangible, measurable, and effective way to address the key issues of affordable housing in our community. And those are issues of supply. They're issues of inclusivity. Those are issues of a broad approach. Those are issues of making sure we continue to work towards end homelessness in our community. And those are issues of prioritizing the resources that we have available in order to do the most effective job we can. Knowing that, at least today, those resources are not unlimited. And within those broad purposes, we have some goals. And one is to strengthen our current commitments, to make sure that maintain the middle and that housing choices are available across the broad spectrum of incomes, because our housing needs encompass the broad spectrum of incomes and demographics. To look to create diverse housing choices in every neighborhood in the city. And that means that we're looking at the opportunity to provide folks who haven't had the opportunity before with access to good schools and high amenity neighborhoods. We're looking to help people stay within the neighborhoods that they grew up in and enjoy the cultural and social connectivity that they've had. And we're looking to not put the burden, if it could be perceived as burden, of providing affordable housing on any one geographic area of the city. To create vibrant neighborhoods, so to make sure that what is happening in terms of affordable housing is not changing the character of neighbors negatively, but in fact improving the character of neighborhoods, recognizing that most of the city of Asheville is urban. And that things like public transportation and access to good jobs and good schools depend upon density in an urban community in order to really be carried through successfully. And to strengthen our partnerships, both our current partnerships, to explore new public-private partnerships, to address our community's challenges, because again, we don't have all the resources to solve these from City of Asheville resources alone, nor from Buncombe County resources alone. This strategy was first presented to the Asheville City Council, and they adopted it in October of 2014, so we're kind of 1 year into it. These action items were, in fact, the action items presented to the Asheville City Council at that time. I just want to review them with you briefly. That we would adopt the housing production goal, and you can see revise the housing production goal for the current year, and I'll be talking about that a little later. That we would have a comprehensive housing market analysis performed, and I think many of you are aware of the Bowen report, which was issued in February for our 4-county region, and that has become the statistical foundation for a broad understanding of our housing needs. And that we would produce our consolidated plan for the use of the federal funds that come into the community that can be used for housing. That's called the consolidated plan. And that consolidated plan was also produced and approved by U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development this year. In the midterm, we were looking to adopt affordable housing policy guidelines, and I'll say that's probably a catch-all for a lot of the things that you'll hear in terms of strategies as I move forward with the presentation today. We would have recommendations for the tools that we would use this year. We would undertake a comprehensive regulatory analysis with recommendations, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And that we would adopt an aspirational long-term goal, hopefully one that was achievable, to substantially affect the need that we know is in our community today. I want to start with bringing us first to that aspirational goal and what that means in terms of how we think we can achieve it. So we start from the top, and we know from the Bowen report that between now and 2020, we're going to have somewhere in the range of 5,000 to 6,000. We are in a supply deficit of 5,000 to 6,000 housing units affordable to households at 120% or less of median income. That includes both owners and renters. We also know, by the way, and not to get into it, that we have that 30,000 households in Asheville and Buncombe County alone are cost burdened, which means that they're paying more than 30% of their income for rents. And just put that into perspective of yourself. If you made, pick a number, $60,000 a year, to think that you should be paying somewhere between $18,000 and $20,000 for your housing. And I would know that most people making that kind of money would choose to pay less if they could. And then think of that if you're making $10,000 a year and whether you could find any housing that would be available to you for $3,000 as a cost for the year. So we have a number of categories that we used in order to say what our pipeline might look like. And you can see that we've ascribed numbers to that Fairly reliable as we look at 2016, a little less reliable, but still fairly reliable in 2017, and certainly far less reliable in 2022. And we've put this out over a 7-year period, even knowing that this projection was for a 5-year need. And those included the categories of direct city investment, which, by the way, does include the federal funds that come in for the region, the federal home funds, which are managed by the city for a 4-county region that includes Buncombe County. Our land use incentive grant and other funds that are dedicated by the city for affordable housing. Zoning density, which means increasing the allowable zone densities throughout our city so that more houses can be built on the same area of land. I'll talk about that a little later. The repurposing of city land and made available for affordable housing purposes, and conditional zoning, which includes conditional zoning and inclusionary zoning, where actually our decision makers can actually negotiate with the private sector for the production of affordable housing. And those categories broadly outline for you our strategies, and I'll talk about each of them in a little bit more depth. This next slide just shows, it's really hard to read. This next slide just shows you what we're projecting in terms of production. And these, there's a fine line between being optimistic and conservative when you're looking at this. But I would say 2016 is relatively reliable. 2017 relatively reliable. Some of those numbers may change based upon individual projects. But the scale, I think, is the scale that we're looking at. We'll have new projects coming in. Some of these might move out, they might be delayed, et cetera. But it just gives you a sense of the kind of developments that are happening. It's a different kind of way of looking at it as opposed to the category of kinds of assistance, but all of these are encapsulated in that prior slide. And looking therefore at a production in 2016 with direct city engagement. And this does not count those efforts that happen without direct city engagement, of 257 units and increasing that to 367 in the next year. After that, the pipeline gets a little fuzzy, but it does give you a sense of what we see happening. So knowing that that's what we're looking at in terms of a realistic production, knowing it doesn't meet the needs, maybe meets half the needs as they're projected now, and that's a need of supply, by the way. This is not addressing the need of cost-burdened households who are already securely housed, and that's not something that we can ignore, but it's right now our priority is to try to get the supply increased so that every family can be housed. We're looking at the tools and strategies that are available that the city has, and that really are the strategies of our affordable housing program right now. They include direct city financing assistance, the Housing Trust Fund, the Land Use Incentive Grant, permit fee rebates, which Buncombe County participates in, by the way, federal home and CDBG funds, capital improvement, and then we look at some other strategies, which include city-owned property and density bonuses and zoning changes. I'll start out with the Housing Trust Fund. The Housing Trust Fund is the direct city general fund investment in affordable housing in our community. It is currently available both for affordable rental housing and affordable home ownership, but affordable rental housing is much highly prioritized. Affordable home ownership right now, we are only making funds available from the Housing Trust Fund for construction financing, and our rates and terms really are not much better than one can do from the private sector. So clearly we're saying that our Affordable Housing Trust Fund is dedicated for affordable rental housing. Our City Council this year allocated $500,000 to our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And although the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is not an enterprise fund per se, or dedicated fund in the city budget, its practice has been that all income received into that fund remains in that fund. So this year we anticipate having somewhere between $600,000 and $950,000 available for our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, pending the disposition of property that we have controlled and bought through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, primarily to preserve affordable housing or affordable housing opportunities when prior loans went bad within our fund. So you can see that we do provide special terms for those providing housing for households at 60% or less of median income. But our rates otherwise are very attractive, and we generally have more subscription for the fund than we have funds available. A good example of the use of that fund is MHO's Larchmont project, which combined this with many other resources, again, including land that Buncombe County sold for this project, in order to create affordable housing in a prime location in the city of Asheville. As you all remember, there was some controversy about it. I think it's now considered a shining example of great affordable housing development in our community that's locationally efficient and occupied by a great diversity of families and households. It represents our city well. Our land use incentive grant starts to move the needle towards more innovation in terms of using city funds for affordable housing. This is, if folks have heard of TIFs, where you actually tax increment financing, where you finance something up front by deferring the taxes coming into your project today. This is similar to a TIF, although it can't be structured in that way and meet the constraints of North Carolina law. And what this allows is for the city to partner with a private sector developer to provide affordable housing and to provide a grant to that developer for a percentage of that affordable housing or the housing total that is affordable over a 15-year period, where the households occupying that housing and the rents for that housing cannot exceed the standards for households at 80% of median income. You can see this. I know this, Andy. I'll assume that this presentation can be made available to your members, so you'll be able to refer to this later. We'll show you this slide again. A little bit hard to read, but I just wanted you to see what that looks like in terms of a projected project. So if you had a private sector project, developer proposed a project that had 20% of the units affordable, had the additional 50% of the units available at workforce rates, which is at 100% of median income, which, by the way, is close but not quite market in terms of new developments happening today, was located in a very efficient location, and gave tenant affordability for some additional time frame. They could conceivably earn as much as 20, 30, 40, 50 points, 5 years worth of tax grants from the city of Asheville. Now, while this cannot be figured typically into your upfront development pro forma, because it is performance based on a year-to-year basis, this can be real money into a development that can allow for the leverage of other funds, particularly borrowed funds, into the project on the front end. So we've made a couple of these grants, by the way, but have recently revised this, because when this program originally started, this was really an amalgam of a sustainability program, including brownfields and other elements, and what we've done is we've really made it an affordable housing program. Additional investment by the city is now planned through our capital improvement fund. And this is funds that are outside of our general fund, typically funds coming into the city either for the disposition of property or funds that are borrowed, that are also now being dedicated to affordable housing. And I think the key thing, the takeaway I want you to have here is that the city's proposed investment in affordable housing for this year, because we did not spend the $250,000 from last year, is the $750 from this fund. What what'll probably turn out to be about 700,000, 750,000 from the Housing Trust Fund. So a $1.5 million local investment available for affordable housing this year through the combination of our capital improvement funding and our Housing Trust Fund. Now, the Housing Trust Fund, by the way, has become really institutionalized. This capital improvement funding is approved year to year by our city council. It budgets $2 million in 2018 and it budgets $2 million in 2020. But those allocations will be dependent on an approval of council on an annual basis. But this council raised the bar and basically said this is the kind of commitment we need to make in order to leverage the kind of affordable housing that our community needs. We talked about the repurposing of city-owned property. We have 2 projects in the works right now, with a third possibly. The one I'd like to focus on here is what's known as the Parks Maintenance Facility. Folks might notice it's right next to the Aston Tennis Courts on Hilliard Street. It's about a 2 3/4 acre property with about an acre that is appropriate for development. And we're going to be issuing a request for proposal. The city manager has challenged us to have that out by the first of the year for this property. And our primary consideration of proposals will be based upon 2 things. And one is the provision of affordable housing on that site. And number 2 is the kinds of resources that are needed from the city to do that. We have a property that is valued somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. And the city council is very clear that the value of the property is something that we'll use as our leverage in order to encourage affordable housing on the site. We're very much looking forward to having this out to the development community and begin talking about this as a first stance in terms of repurposing city property. I will tell you, just as a side, repurposing government property that's already in active use is a very difficult thing to do, because you got to find some place for the thing that's there to go, you know, that leads to some challenges. But now this one, a site has been found for our parks maintenance facility, and we expect that movement to happen by the first of the fiscal year, July 1st, and therefore we'll be looking to really take action on that fairly quickly. Moving away from those kinds of things to our regulatory environment, the working towards removing barriers in our regulatory codes, and looking at how we can increase the opportunity to use our available land in the city for affordable housing is something that a lot of attention is being paid to by our planning department. We all know that one of the major obstacles and impediments to affordable housing development in our community is that our land is very, very expensive and topographically challenged. So we don't have the large tracts of land that you see developed in other places, 250, 300 unit subdivisions, houses being sold for $130,000. It's not happening in this community. We don't have that scale of availability. So what we're looking to do is turn our attention to those places where the land is available, where there already is some density, and trying to move out of the development patterns of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which were really about segregating commercial from residential uses, to more of the urban design principles of today, which says that residential uses and commercial uses are actually very complementary. They steward each other and they lead to vibrancy. So our city council in December changed the densities in, I think there's 12 zoning districts here, which are our primary commercial zoning corridors, and you can see that they increased significantly the density that was allowable by right, and then they further added a density bonus, that if a developer was to build 20% affordable units, in most cases they'd be able to double the density that was allowed on those parcels. This is still fairly early out to the development community. There have been no proposals yet, although we're expecting some soon from what we know of the emerging pipeline that will be taking advantage of this. And we're also looking to to make sure that our code accommodates residential development. Some of our parking requirements, for example, setback height restrictions that were really designed to support suburban shopping centers. We're looking to review them and to remove them if they don't make sense in terms of residential development, so that residential development can happen more easily on these parcels. I will also mention, as part of that we have also recently revived our accessory dwelling unit regulations to increase the availability of single-family sites in our community that can take advantage of accessory dwelling units by about 100%, by changing those ADU regulations to remove barriers. For one example of that would be is that you had to have 100 feet of street frontage in order to be able to put in an accessory dwelling unit. We've removed the street frontage requirement. If you have your driveway area and sufficient room in the rear of your lot for an accessory dwelling unit, you can now put an accessory dwelling unit on your site. Now, that accessory dwelling unit change, by the way, does not directly relate to affordability, and one of the questions that we'll be looking at as we go through the winter into the spring is whether we want to create an incentive program specifically for accessory dwelling units. Back to direct financial assistance, the Community Development Block Grant and the Federal Home Program are also very important resources. These are a little harder to plan on. I know any of you that work using federal funds know that it's now a year-to-year situation where we really can't know what's going to happen this year. In the Senate, for example, until just recently, there was it seemed their original THUD budget reduced the federal home program to about 10% of its current size, essentially eliminating the program. The most recent Senate budget appears to bring the home program back to its current funding levels. And we know these things are going to be footballs. But this gives you just some sense of the kind of housing that has been created using these federal funds. And I hope it's clear to you how important they are as an additional resource in our community. So now we start looking at next steps and how do we achieve this goal of 2,800 units in the next 7 years. We have an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Scott Dedman is a member of that committee. That committee has been very proactive in recommending policy changes, and their continuing recommendation is that the city funding to the Housing Trust Fund be increased to 1 cent per $100 of taxable value in our community. Today, that would be about 1.1 million, and they continue to advocate that in City Council. That we create new public-private partnerships. We are doing that, for example, on the Parks Maintenance property by opening up that to generally to the development community and seeing who in the development community may be interested in developing a 100% affordable development, by trying to partner more with private sector through our land use incentive grant, but also by continuing to honor those great partnerships we have with our existing housing organizations. To maximize as much as possible the low-income housing tax credit program, which is the primary federal program right now for affordable housing development, but very limited at the 9% credit program, 30 awards being made per year in the entire state of North Carolina, and making sure that we're providing sufficient leverage for those applications coming from Buncombe County so that Buncombe County is getting an award every year. And exploring the 4% credit program, which involves debt generally, but trying to use that and looking at that as a preservation strategy. Continuing to remove regulatory barriers and increase density throughout our community. Looking to increase our transportation housing connection, making sure that our developments are multimodal, but also looking at our transportation systems to make sure that they're serving our community and over time increasing the viability of using public transportation to get to work, school, and services. Prioritizing incentives for maximum impact. So really looking at how we are making sure that our incentives, that we're getting the biggest bang for the buck. And further researching tools such as inclusionary zoning, which have been proven to nationally, where enabled by state law, which is not enabled, by the way, in the state of North Carolina, mandatory inclusionary zoning, to actually have developers required to include affordable housing when they develop market rate housing in a community. Approaching the very end of my presentation, thank you for your attention here today. I will refer you, we recently had a housing summit. Some of you may have attended. I'd say 150, 200 people that really listened to a broad array of public and private sector viewpoints on how we address our affordable housing needs in our community. Very excited I am that the Chamber of Commerce has established a housing task force that will be looking at ways that the private sector can be more engaged in meeting these needs in our community. And as part of that, 2 interns of the City of Asheville produced the best practices for affordable housing that shows 11 ways that public-private partnerships are creating more affordable housing nationally. And I would refer you to that. Knowing that you will get this, I know you don't need to write this down, but that report, as well as the Bowen report, as well as many other aspects of what I talked about today and what the City of Asheville is doing, the consolidated plan is doing in partnership with Buncombe County and our other counties, can be found on the city's website in the community development, off the community development page. Always glad to talk to folks about affordable housing and to hear your great ideas. Thanks for the opportunity to make this presentation today.
I do have one quick question for you. So your goal of 2,800 units over the next 7 years, how do you feel it's going to keep up with the increase in demand over that same period of time?
So let me say that the reason I have this device is that I have very poor hearing. It helps me a little bit, so if you would speak up with your question, I'd so appreciate it.
So your goal of 2,800
Yes.
Units over the next 7 years, how do you feel this will keep up with the increased need that may occur over the next 7 years?
I think we're only going to do that if the private sector is directly and significantly engaged in helping meet our affordable housing needs in our community. It's the only way it's going to happen.
So as a follow-up to that, then, you mentioned a little bit about the accessory housing and a goal of maybe looking at providing some incentives for people, because we are land strapped, so sometimes it's one house at a time, one accessory dwelling. I would encourage you all to look at that as a viable plan to encourage the private sector, hence the private homeowner, to be able to build these accessory housing, because I know in my neighborhood I have at least 3 that are being occupied. I'm thinking if I'm the homeowner and I can do this as an affordable housing option for somebody with an incentive, it's going to stimulate maximizing land use.
Yes, thank you. We're actually looking at some models, for example, on Cape Cod right now, that faces similar issues where they've incentivized accessory dwelling units as a key part of their housing strategy. So, thank you.
We do have time for just a few questions in terms of the panel as a whole, and then we're going to break out and divide the panel among the board members. Part of the board members with Rachel on one side and part with Amanda on the other. But now is a good time. Scott, I know you handed out some additional information. I don't know if you want to mention that, or any follow-up questions to any of the panel. You go ahead.
Thank you. If anyone was not here at the last meeting a month ago, I have more copies of the handout, and it's kind of the core information about the jobs and how the jobs translates into the rents that people can afford and the gap between the wages and the income. So if you don't have that, I've got a few more here that I'd be happy to give you. But today we handed out this that originated from Tom Tavid is here from Geneva, and 2 meetings ago of this body, Tom presented, and so I kind of butchered up one of his slides. It's this one, and I took out, with apologies. Every time I see Tom, I apologize. It's like, Tom, I used your data, and I misused your data, but basically, I just wanted to focus on the red part of those top 2 bars on that chart, which is how fast are we increasing in need on average for the past, for the 4-year period that he showed that was a recent U.S. Census period, 2009 to 2013. And basically, in the most severe cost burden, which is the top bar, paying over 50% of your income for rent, we were increasing during those 4 years at about 250 households per year. So what I'm saying to the community, and I said this at the Housing Summit that Jeff mentioned on Monday afternoon, I'm asking us as a community not to meet all of the need at once, quickly, because you see that if you add up these, even just the top 2 bars, and you take the whole bar, you're taking 8,000 and almost 4,000. There's almost 12,000 households, which is about 24,000 people in our community in Buncombe County that are paying over 40% of their income for rent in those top 2 bars. I'm not asking to meet all of that need, just to stop falling behind so quickly with the red part of the bar, which is the annual increase of about 500 per year. And the way we know how to make any significant dent in this is on the other side of the page, and it very closely matches the strategies, although I don't think I have the numbers matched up with Jeff's numbers in a good way based on what I saw today, but the strategies are what we know to do, which is to use the 9% tax credits. It's a federal housing tax credit. Most of what MHO builds, most of the stuff that's on this sheet here, and the apartments that we're having a grand opening on in 2 weeks, most of those things are built with the 9% housing tax credits. That's the largest source of affordable housing development in America and in North Carolina and in Buncombe County. And then the 4% tax credits, which is fairly new for us, and it's something that David Nash on my right, Cindy Weeks on my left are looking very closely at for the Lee Walker Heights development near Mission Hospital. And then a little bit there for home ownership. And then the bottom 2 lines don't add new units, but they're, to me, an important part of meeting the need. But the new housing supply is on the top 3 lines of numbers there. Basically, what I'm saying is with something above, but not terribly far above, $5 million of new investment per year, we could stop falling behind so quickly. And that seems like a pitiful and modest way to ask for a goal, for us to set a goal. But it's still, $5 million is a lot of money, whether it's from the private community, Chamber of Commerce, the different industries that are listed on last month's sheet, or whether it's from governmental funds. It's a big ask, and we would be able to say, look, we're not meeting all the need, but we're adding approximately 250 new units to our housing supply every year. That's what I'm asking us to consider.
Any other panel questions? Any instruction, Amanda, you or Rachel have about breaking people up, other than the panelists joining either group on that side of the room and then the board splitting, or this side? Nancy, I don't know if planning board wants to split, so y'all, if you're both groups, however you're comfortable, and Johnny, they did stick for your stuff. So, half of them, right, Rachel, your way, in terms of board and panel, and a half over here with Amanda, and we're gonna work on developing actual strategies. And their tables there.
I do too. I didn't even get any this morning.